some of you, I know that some of you wanted to see the session in North America and were unable. So the material is more or less the same. There's just a few updates since then. We'll point them out as it goes. So welcome everybody, and let me just introduce myself quickly. My name is Thiago Macieira. So I'm an open source developer. I've been for a decade and a half. I've been working out of the Portland office of Intel's Open Source Technology Center for about a year now, as a platform community manager for Tizen and also as a software architect. So I have two hats I wear at work, sometimes both at the same time. The interesting thing is that my work here with the Tizen community, the Tizen platform community, overlaps a lot with my last big project that I did, which was the creation of the Qt project and open governance for Qt. So that helped with the experience and getting things out. Right now I'm also a maintainer in 2 modules in the Qt project, so that's my other hat. Right?
Hi everybody, I'm Guy Martin, and like Thiago, I wear a lot of hats. Turns out it's Samsung. I'm part of the new Samsung open source group that is actually modeled very much after Intel's OTC. And we're about 10 months in with this group, and I basically do senior strategy for that team. But I have a technical background as a software developer for a number of years, but I think probably the last 8 to 9 years of my career have been focused on community management, taking open source best practices and helping organizations use those to better their software development. So prior to coming to Samsung, I've been here about almost 6 months. I built Red Hat's strategic open source consulting practice, which surprisingly, when I got there, they didn't have. And so we actually were able to build something that Red Hat now still today goes out and works with customers on how they actually do open source in a more efficient way. So why are we actually talking about moving Tizen to an open development model? I think the thing that strikes me is that as much as we say Android is open source, I would actually characterize Android as more source available. It's not developed in a truly collaborative model where you have people similar to the way the Linux kernel or other big open source projects are developed, where you actually have multiple committers and multiple people coming in to make this a viable project. So up to the I guess we're at 2.2 now, up to the 2.2 release of Tizen, that was developed Tizen was developed in a very similar way, kind of in a shared restricted environment between Samsung and Intel. And the goal with Tizen 3.0 is to actually make good on the promise of making this a truly open source project. And to do that, the main area of development and contributions is moving to tizen.org. Prior to the 3.0 release, basically releases would get put out on tizen.org. The ongoing development going forward is actually going to happen out there. And basically, the main code tree is going to be able to be pulled and built by anyone, anywhere. And there may be a very small number of profile-specific packages, or maybe device-specific packages, either on the IVI side for Intel or on the device side for Samsung, that may continue to be developed using the quote-unquote old model, the shared private first, and then maybe eventually moving to tizen.org. But the bottom line in all of this, tizen.org is actually going to become what we all anticipated it would be at some point, which is the primary development hub for the Tizen project. And so I think that's a great move forward. So when we put this together, and Thiago and I have done a lot of chatting about this because of his work in the Qt project, plus the work I've done in consulting, we really wanted to put together what we thought were good overall governance guidelines for the project. So we kind of broke it down into kind of must categories and should categories. So on the must side, we really want the community members to be respectful of one another, and this is not only because that the majority of the community members today are from organizations like Samsung and Intel, but even going forward, we wanted that to be kind of a cornerstone of the community where you could actually do valuable work and not have it devolve into flame wars and personal attacks. And we definitely wanted to make sure that the Tizen community rules are followed, and that the general direction of the Tizen project is set by the Tizen steering group, but that people that are actually developing the code have a way to get back to the TSG and get them to rule on kind of the potential conflicts that may come up. On the should side, community members, we want to come together, and when I say community members, we should point out that it's not just members from companies like Intel, Samsung, other folks that are maybe part of the community going forward, but we welcome individual developers, individual contributor developers. We don't honestly expect there to be a whole lot of them. Maybe you guys will prove us wrong, but basically we want people to come and contribute and improve to Tizen, the platform. And as part of the responsibility of being a good community citizen, you need to be able to mentor and help out new contributors, and also feel free to approach the Tizen steering group with important matters that may come up. I hate that we had to highlight the disrespect of the rules may be sanctioned, but the reality is that in a lot of open source projects, without that sort of stick that you wield to say, hey, we don't want this to devolve into something bad, you kind of have to put that there. So we're going to operate in this community under a principle of lazy consensus and silent consent. So procedurally, right, you want to reach consensus in small groups at each individual module that you're working on. And if you disagree, it's your responsibility to provide an alternative solution. And if you think everything's going great, you have nothing to add, then basically if you don't say anything, we'll just assume that you're giving your consents. But the requirements around this is that we actually want there to be public discussion. And so one of the things I think Thiago's going to point out later in the presentation is that a big deal for Tizen for 3.0 is that the development mailing list is now public, which was a big change from the way it was previously developed. And so that's a big part of what we're trying to drive here is actual public discussion around what goes on in the Tizen platform. And you need to have active membership that's actually following those discussions, and a reasonable time period for when you're gonna put in objections. And we do say that reasonable can be taken on a case-by-case basis depending upon which module we're talking about.
Yeah, the idea is like if it's a small decision, you can just wait 24 hours, so cycle, side time zone. If it's a large decision, you might wait. You might have to consider people traveling to conferences.
Yes, exactly. So let's talk a little bit about the decision-making and meritocracy that we're trying to enable in this community. And the goal behind this is that your responsibilities and rights in the project are going to be awarded to those who merit them. So I feel a little bit silly talking at an open source conference about this because it's kind of the motherhood and apple pie of open source, right? Your role in the project and your status in the project is determined by what you're contributing. We're trying to drive the decisions again down to the lowest level, to the module level, or to the individual pieces of the project, and people with merit are going to be allowed to help make those decisions. And again, the lazy consensus applies here as well, in that your decisions are going to be public, and you are going to have to allow other people to object. And so we put all of this down here. One of the reasons that we are doing this is that both, I think, from the Intel and the Samsung side, a lot of what we're trying to do is educate, or even our own internal developers. Did we lose something?
The wireless connector again.
Educate our own internal developers, because in a lot of cases, they're not used to working in this environment, and they're not used to working in this kind of structure. So we're trying to make sure that they're comfortable with it and understand the ramifications of working in this kind of environment. And we do have the concept of higher level folks that are overseeing decisions and possibly overriding them as necessary. And that goes all the way up to the Tizen steering group, but it's also the architect committee that Thiago is going to mention in a minute here. So let's talk a little bit about what we're trying to do in principles of the Tizen code base. So the big goal that we're trying to move to in 3.0 that is different than the way Tizen is developed in the current release is we want to keep the code as close to the upstream modules that it's comprised of as possible. And if we're going to do an upgrade, it's really got to be justified. It's not going to be something that we're just going to put out there because we think it's a great idea, but we don't have any support for it in the upstream community. And the overall goal of the project is to have one project that runs on multiple profiles. So I know that Yunsu probably covered in his presentation the idea of profiles and ties into how the architecture is structured. But we're looking at the same code base here, but different build options and different features enabled depending upon what device you're targeting. Contributors are going to have to focus on the whole project rather than just on a specific profile. And that's actually pretty important. While you may have some developers that are doing profile-specific things, our goal is to have everybody be able to work on the common pieces, and Tiago will dive into this a little bit more, but work on the common pieces of the platform, because that's the only way that it's going to improve. If you're just focusing on, maybe IVI without thinking about how things are affected in the common platform, that's going to be something that is going to be a problem. And we're really, again, trying to avoid hard coding things in there. So it's all of the, again, motherhood and apple pie in terms of people who are used to working in open source. So with that, I'm actually going to let Tiago dive into talking about things like what makes a profile and some of the project roles.
Yeah, thank you, Guy. Just wanted to point out one thing also, that these slides are also the same thing that we're also presenting to our internal teams, and I see a lot of familiar faces from Samsung and Intel in this room. So the interesting thing is, some of the messages we're giving you here, for them ring differently. Like, for example, don't hard code. We're guilty of doing it in the past, and like, we're trying to change it. The profile here, I'm actually not going to talk too much about it because Yunsu covered in his presentation, so thanks for that. It was much in depth, and they don't have much of the background to give it here, so I'm just going to tell you the idea of the profile is that we're going to pick up packages and construct different distributions, different releases, and we of course do not want, that's where the no hard coding comes in. We want the same builds to work on all of the platforms. But since he covered most of that, I'm just going to go ahead and talk about the product roles. If you've seen me present about the Kit project in the past 2 years, you saw a slide similar to this, and again we have the wireless is trying to connect. Let me just turn this thing off here. Yep. And this one pyramid here is also because of that. It's the way I'm using to present the idea. And I promise you, if you come to my presentation on Wednesday, you're not going to see another one of these. The idea here is that we're trying to get a lot of developers to come to the project, and the decisions need to be made on the lowest level possible. The people who are above on the ranks of the ladder there are just so that they can oversee a lot more. They have more experience. So how this is going to work, and we're going to go into detail on each of these levels, is basically that people who are in this lowest category of developers, they can participate, they can submit code. The reviewers are the ones who can offer a positive or negative reviews and approve the reviews. The maintainers are the people who have a responsibility to the project to maintain that code base and make sure that it's also correct. And that's why you see the star at the end of maintainers there. There's exactly one maintainer per repository. That means this person is responsible, is required to take into account, is required to keep this thing working. And of course, it's more about the QA guys coming and say, hey, this is broken, you gotta fix it.
I'm just going to add, we'll talk a little bit more in detail in a couple of slides, but also the idea is that you're grooming potential additional maintainers, because if one of them is away on vacation, traveling to a conference, you have to have other people that can step into that role.
Definitely, thank you for that. Okay, so without long delay, what are the requirements? Who is a developer? And I'm going to answer developer is everyone who wants to be a developer. There is no requirement other than having the skills to participate. You don't have to work for one of our companies. You do not have to sign any agreements. You do not have to go through hazing. We don't do that. I see somebody back there smiling. So you actually have to post to the mailing list. You have to participate. The idea is that you have to have the skills to contribute in the sense of the technical skills. You can send your opinions, you can send your contributions, your code contributions. You can even, and we're encouraging you to participate in the review process of anybody that is participating in tizen. That means you can give +1 or -1. Who of you, that raise hands, has used the tool called Garrett of code reviews? Okay, so you know what the +1, -1 is. For those who haven't, it is a positive or negative non-binding review. It means this looks good, but I cannot be certain. Somebody else has to confirm afterwards. Or -1 means this could use some improvement, but if somebody else says it's okay, then it's okay. We give this right to everybody who just creates an account. We encourage people to actually do that so that you gain the experience and you show that you know this. We're never going to know that you're actually capable unless you do it. We don't want to have to require you to fill out forms or prove it any other way. Just wondering if I should point out that everybody, including the lowest level developer, can and should approach higher levels in terms of any decisions they think might be wrong. And that includes, for example, approaching the technical steering group or the architects. Whenever you feel that the decision is going the wrong direction or it's incomplete or missing something for whatever reason, everybody's encouraged to participate.
So one of the things that Tiago had in his previous slide is you should be acting as a reviewer basically from the time that you start. And I think that's important because it gets to Tiago's point about we're never going to kind of suss out your technical capabilities and your community capabilities in this project unless you're acting as a reviewer as you go along. And so your role as a reviewer is to make decisions on contributions. Again, it's the in this case, it's the -2 and +2, so it is the binding review in this case. And you're expected to proactively participate in this review process. And to get to a reviewer status, you want to be acting as a reviewer from the beginning. You may not be giving +2, -2 in that case, but if you're contributing to the mailing list as we're expecting you to, you're going to get noticed to a point where eventually you'll have the ability to become a reviewer. The reviewers participate in the release process. They obviously can't approve their own contributions because that would be kind of silly. But the goal is for them to offer constructive comments when rejecting a contribution. And so it's not just, well, this stinks and I can't tell you why, it's a personal opinion. Here's constructive comments about why this is being rejected and how you can bring it back to us to eventually get it included. And the goal of the reviewer also is to make sure that that any contributions are actually going to be production ready and have the ability to go into the tree. So how do you become a reviewer? Obviously, we talk about the candidate needing to be known to the community. So again, how do you do that? You participate in the mailing list, you participate in the discussions, you participate by submitting patches, and we haven't really sussed out, I think, when we say submitting patches for a while. I mean, it's kind of subjective in the sense that it also depends not only on how long have you been contributing those patches, but how important have those patches been in the community. So, I don't know if we talked about if you've contributed 50 documentation patches, is that more or less, than contributing 50 pieces of code? Yeah, it's subjective.
It's a matter of really it's going to be a subjective rule. We're going to have to judge on case-by-case basis. If you come and suddenly submit 50 and you prove that you're good, and we actually can tell by looking at your past contributions to other projects, sure, why not? If it's a total unknown person, we're going to have to look at it. Another important aspect is going to be, are you going to stick around? Yeah. Right, so if you give you any responsibility, any duties to the project, is this person going to stick around? Is it going to be worth our while?
Right, I think that's important. And I touched on this earlier. We expect you to already be reviewing contributions and offering your suggestions and advice to those. The rules of how you actually get nominated, you need to be nominated by an existing reviewer or maintainer. Actually, I think we even said even higher up the chain technically.
Yeah, I mean, as long as there's the idea was you need 2 people to nominate. Mm-hmm. One of them must be a maintainer, and hopefully the maintainer of the packages you're contributing to. Right. So not somebody completely unrelated. Right,
and basically, if you get nominated and there's no objections within 3 weeks, you're now a reviewer and expected to be fulfilling the role of the reviewer.
Yeah. So maintainer are just like the reviewers. The difference now is that they have a responsibility. So like I pointed out in the asterisk before, The maintainer does everything that the reviewer does, so has the same rights and duties, the +2, -2, must not approve on contributions, etc. Actually, we relax the must not approve because the maintainer is also required to verify that everything that was submitted to that particular repository, that particular module, got reviewed. So if he submitted himself a change and nobody else approved, now we're in a slight bind that you should not review your own, but somebody needs to review. So we make an exception, like you actually can review your own if nobody else does. We should strive to make sure that everybody else does. The maintainer has got a very important duty to the project, which is to make sure that things are running smoothly. So we give them a little more leeway, a little more privileges. For example, they can create new branches, they can delete branches, they can rebase a branch on Git depending on upstream contributions and whatever, things like that. With that, with the new duties that we give you, so this person now has to do a job to the project, we give you a little more rights. So we give it a little for compensation, let's say. And it is that the maintainer is now given the right and responsibility to interpret long-term decisions from the Tizen project into short-term goals. So, for example, we can just say now our next goal is going to be for 3.0 to run on Wayland, right? So it's a long-term goal. We're going to switch everybody to Wayland, and this is going to stay along for a while. Now, a maintainer, let's suppose this person is the maintainer of EFL, right? He's sitting right back there. And he might say, upstream has these features we need in, so we're going to rebase. We're going to have to do these tests. So these are the short-term goals that he set for the people who are working on his module, along with himself, of course. The important thing is the maintainers are now somebody who have a responsibility. They have to be there. They have to be participating in the release process. They have to be participating in the QA process. So when the QA engineer comes and says your package is broken or is causing failures over there, for whatever reason, this person needs to act. Now, of course, people take vacations. They go on sabbaticals sometimes.
Travel to conferences.
They go to conferences, yes. So a maintainer can delegate part of his responsibility to somebody we call integrator, and that is somebody who will act as the maintainer while the maintainer is away, or in addition. So if Carsten's got a lot of changes coming in because Rafael in the back is sending a lot of patches, he might actually just add somebody to help him out. So it's okay. And how do you do that? He just says this person has also got the right to do that. So it's an extension of the maintainer's responsibility, just to make sure that nobody becomes a bottleneck. But the maintainer is still the one responsible. Now, how does one become a maintainer? Just like we did for reviewer before, it requires a nomination by an existing maintainer or architect, so anybody above, and an agreement now by 2 instead of just 1, by more people. And if, again, no objections are raised in 3 weeks, it happens. Of course, slight detail, if you're going to become a maintainer for a package, there has to be a package. That package needs to have no maintainer already. So we don't want to create maintainers for status. It's not because it's not a privilege, it's a job. So somebody becomes a maintainer because this package needs a new maintainer.
I wanted to point out one thing that you didn't cover there, but it should be common, and it is common if you look at it, is as you're going up each successive level, we're expecting you to already be acting at that level from the level that you are below, so reviewer to maintainer, maintainer to architect.
Yeah, exactly. So thanks for pointing it out. If you want to become a reviewer, we're basically expecting you to be acting as a reviewer while you're still a developer. That's why we give you the rights to give positive and negative reviews to existing contributions. That's how you prove that you can act as a reviewer. Same thing in the case of maintainer. You basically need to be acting out like it. You need to be looking after the quality of the code, the health of the module, and you actually probably will be giving advice to other people. right? So when you are acting as a maintainer, you're giving advice, you're looking after the health of the code, and the other maintainer went away, well, by all means, let's give you the maintainership. Yeah.
Okay, so in terms of what other roles there are in the project, you saw on the chart earlier, we have this concept of a release engineer whose basic job is to do the pre-release pieces and put together images. And so we give them all of the rights that the developer has, but also let them make sure that they have the ability to report bugs. And actually everybody has the ability to report bugs, but they're part of their specific job here.
Yeah, the difference is that they want to should report bugs.
Yes.
Right. It's part of the job description.
Exactly. And again, in the must category, they manage the build system, they approve or reject submissions into the build system, and basically create these images and run smoke tests on them. And they're key components in participating in the release process overall. Now, when you look at the QA side, they're basically there to ensure the overall quality of each Tizen release. And again, they get the rights and duties that you would expect from the developer side, and they're basically must be participating in the release verification process.
Now, I mentioned the architect, and the architecture group, now this is the top category. There are, now we're calling it's now the TSG architecture work group. That means these are the guys, the experts on the project that actually set the direction for. They oversee the entire project, so they're not responsible for one particular or even one group of packages. They look after the entire thing. So we're going to have a certain number of people called architects. They together, each individually, but together, they're responsible for the entire project. They're of course given the all reviewers' rights. Some of them might be even maintainers for their own reasons, but that's unrelated. And their goal, if I summarize what you're seeing on this slide, is they guide the project. Right? So we ask long-term contributors, people who have shown the dedication to the project. Then not only that, they're actually senior people who see the big picture. Right? It's not just because you've actually been participating for 5 years. If you're looking at one particular spot, you're actually not going to become an architect. We want somebody who has the experience to say, if you make this change here, this is going to break over there. If we make these two completely unrelated changes for you, it seems they're unrelated action, this is going to improve over there. They might be bringing expertise from different domains. So for example, somebody more experienced on IVI instead of mobile, things like that.
I also should point out here that the goal of this is that we want to have people that aren't Samsung or Intel. I mean, let's be honest, that we're trying to get some diversity into what's going on in the project, and so we're expecting technical experts from other companies, or again, if you're an individual developer not associated with a company, we welcome that as well. But I think the goal is to provide more diversity than kind of what we have today as the project has grown up.
Yeah. So the architect. So an architect is the member of the architecture work group. So architects are expected to participate in the architecture work group. What is the architecture work group? So, like I explained, it is a group of people responsible for the overall project. They periodically will meet, either by IRC or phone, that doesn't matter. And they might invite technical experts on any domain where they need to make big decisions. So, do we do this? Do we do that? They're not all expected to know all the technical details. They just invite the people needed. If necessary, these discussions can be private. If there is a very important topic, a very hot debated topic that needs to be under closed doors, this is a group that can make decisions under closed doors. But if they make a decision, they have to make the decision made non-publicly, of course.
And be willing to accept feedback on that decision.
Of course. Right. The guy mentioned before the lazy consensus. That means that we don't have to expect everybody to participate in everything. If you agree, just be silent. It's a consent. If one of the architects has a problem, they can speak up. how do you become an architect? The architects select themselves. So we're going to bootstrap the project with a few of them. So we have actually more than 8 right now. We need to trim down the list a little. And the existing architects invite this person because that expertise that this person is bringing is interesting for the project. So this person is already giving advice, has been providing input, has been working with the community, and is also bringing a new perspective that the architecture work group lacks. This person will be invited to become an architect.
Okay, and I don't know why you always give me the sanctions and revocation of rights, right? This is the bad news slide, as I call it. But basically, all contributors at all levels are expected to maintain the community rules that we're setting out here. And if there's continued disrespect, we can take several avenues on how to fix that. And we're trying to really look at these on a case-by-case basis and not say, okay, for this sort of behavior, we're always going to do this. It's going to be dependent upon how severe it is, kind of what the individual case looks like.
That's actually a very good example of where the architectural work group might meet in private.
Right.
If they need to discuss a sanction for somebody, well, there's where they can discuss.
Right. But in general, when we list these examples of sanctions, this is kind of in increasing order of severity. But official warning by a community management team: hey, stop that. Let's knock that off and get back on topic. We could end up doing revocation of rights, where your reviewership, maintainership, whatever is taken away. Moderation of posts, again, we really don't want to do that. Not only because it's bad form in an open source community, but it's kind of a pain in the neck to deal with, quite honestly. And we could end up doing temporary or permanent banning from the community forums as well. And again, we reserve the right to make additional potential sanctions. We didn't want that to be an exhaustive list.
Yeah. So how things will work, or should I say how things are working right now? We have 3 main tools. One of them is the well-known for everybody here, the email. Everybody's got access to email if you're on the internet, and therefore that's all you need to participate in most cases. We have 2 extra tools that are web tools. The Gerrit for code contributions. It's a tool for those of you who have used previously Android or some other projects. That's what we use for managing the contributions, reviewing, giving feedback. And we have this also another tool called Jira for bug reporting, and we're also using for keeping track of tasks, features, feature completion, milestones for the future, API change requests that Yunsu is creating right now. We're looking at a process that's going to be using this tool as well.
And just to point out, the email list now, like I said, is public. And
yeah.
It previously wasn't. There are still some discussions that go on the internal list that we're slowly migrating.
And this is where we have an update since the New Orleans. The mailing list address that you see here is public. So this mailing list, we actually created it about a month ago. We did a soft launch by inviting all of our engineers from Intel and Samsung working on Tizen. We invited some partner companies. But we didn't make a very public splash about it, and I'll tell you why. Because I want you guys to look at it today if you want to participate, and look at the archives. And if you look at the archives today, you're going to see that this list is actually discussing technical things. You see Intel and Samsung engineers discussing with each other, and it's not that behind closed doors we made a decision and now we're just posting it publicly. We're actually discussing the public. And sometimes you see 2 Samsung engineers disagree with each other. That's normal.
Carsten.
We do the same. I don't know. Carsten always disagrees with
He disagrees with everybody. He's our designated disagreeer.
It's my job. Someone has to do it.
Somebody has to do it. It's not. He's a really nice guy, and he's got a lot of technical expertise. And we're not expecting him to walk into everybody's office. But when he sees an email, somebody proposing something that could be improved, by all means, post it. And that's what he's doing, and that's what we expect everybody to do. So if you look at the archives today, for this mailing list, you're going to see about a month right now of really in-depth technical discussions on how we're going to solve these problems. problems for the future. Right now we have a number of packages that don't build. So somebody from the Q8 team in either Samsung or Intel posts a list, these packages don't build. Please take a look. We can have an email saying, these contributions have gone unreviewed. Please take a look. This is also the mailing list where the architectural workgroup decisions will be posted to. So whenever there's one of those decisions that had to be done in the private, this is where the conclusion will come to. If the traffic becomes too high, we will split the mailing list. Right now we want to keep everything in one place so that we can actually have technical discussions and everybody can pay attention. Everybody at least receives it, and we have the principle of the lazy consensus that required correct audience. Rules, I probably don't have to tell you these guys, but again, since we actually show this presentation to some of our engineers inside who are not so proficient in open source, it's good to point out the mailing list is open for everybody to subscribe, therefore no confidential material. Please do not post confidential material. And if you do not contact the owner to get something removed. By the time that we receive your email saying I did a mistake, it's been indexed by Google, it's on Gmail, it's all over the internet. So please do not post anything confidential to this mailing list. We expect everybody to be respectful of one another. I mentioned the Jira mailing tool. It's a regular bug tracking, task tracking tool. It's just got a very, very nice web interface, and we've got workflows for many of the activities we're going to do. If you want to see, for example, what the release must contain, right? So we're going to say Tizen 3.0 is going to be more or less at this date, and in addition to that, needs to fulfill these criteria. These criteria will be there. So when the architects meet, and especially the business people meet and say, we want to achieve these things, and we want 4 instead of 3 buttons, we want, I don't know, what they might decide in the business meetings. They might end up there. So all of these will be public for everybody to see, and if you want to participate, you can see where we're going there. Code reviews, again, I'm not going to demo the tool because unfortunately wireless is a bit flaky down here. But you can log in. You just need to create an account before you see anything. This is especially because this is just for our servers not to go down with everybody cloning everything. We actually require somebody to create an account, so just a slight step, but you can participate. The moment that you create the account, you can actually click on one of those. Can you see any names there? Well, there's nothing by Carsten. So you could find something by Carsten there, and
-1.
my -1 say you did something wrong, so he keeps disagreeing with everybody, you can go disagree with him. No, you only do that if he actually makes a mistake, which is rare, right?
It happens. It happens.
It happens, sure. But we expect people to do and offer the -1+1. Reviewers can do the permanent reject. Here's an interesting thing. Whenever something's approved, it stays in a state where the maintainer needs to take a look at it. So the maintainers need to periodically look at this tool and verify all of the contributions that are ready for integration. So I'll explain it like this. Any developer could come, write code, submit a Gerrit. It gets reviewed by a developer, by a maintainer, by a reviewer, by an architect, it doesn't matter, it gets reviewed. If there are problems with the submissions, there need to be suggestions on how to improve it. Like Guy said, all the feedback needs to be constructive. Nobody says, I don't like you, go away. And then you just cycle there in this top part, improving until it's ready. It gets approved. And once it gets approved, the maintainer takes a look at everything that's approved and bunches them together into a release to the build system. Why we did this step? This is just a step so that we are sure that things go in the right order at the right time. So for example, there might be a package that is, right now we need to fix this, we have a few important bug fixes that need to go in, so I don't want to integrate the new features. I don't want to integrate these other things. So I'm just gonna wait on these for a while. They're approved, so they will go in. But I just want to get these first. We fix the build, the release machinery goes on, and then I'll get the features in, for example. And after it's released to the build system, of course, we have daily images, weekly images. You can download, test on your device, test on VMs, etc. And we get the release image. We just ask the release engineers to verify the release it boots, and it builds and boots. We don't want to release something that doesn't. Decision making. I just made this table here to explain. So this slide and the next one is just explain a little some of the decisions that we explained in the past here. So who can approve a code contribution? If it's just a small change, the reviewer can participate. That's enough. Just use the mailing list if necessary, otherwise the code review tool is enough. If you're impacting multiple packages, if you're impacting, it's a slightly bigger impact change, you probably need the maintainers involved to agree on it. So how do you reach the maintainers involved? You're not going to send an email to each one of them. First of all, it might not be that easy to find out who they are. But most importantly, I don't want you to send emails to private people. Just post to the mailing list, because somebody else might see it and offer constructive criticism and improve on it. Large issues, now we start involving the architects. They have to sometimes go into the architecture work group meetings to make decisions. And one important thing is the API that affects the Tizen compliance. They need to be discussed in a separate forum. The rules for which we're right now discussing. So Yunsu is leading that project. We're trying to figure out how to do this. We're probably going to use Jira. If you have suggestions on how to improve this process, reach out to us. We're trying to figure this out.
And that discussion is actually going on the mailing list as well.
Right now, Yunsu got a few people involved just to get an idea to bootstrap it, and we'll post the suggestion. If nobody objects, it goes into effect. If somebody has a suggestion, it will cycle it. And since we're actually running out of time, I'm gonna shorten a little. This again, suggestions on how you verify something. So if you want to today create an account on tizen.org and start reviewing, how do I give +1 and -1? Here's a suggestion list. Take a look at technical rules first. These are usually easy to verify. Does it compile? Right? If somebody submitted something without even compiling and you detect it, it's easy to tell. But use your experience as a developer and say, hey, you're introducing a bug here, this is actually worse there, you're not following guidelines here. And as you grow in experience, you might be able to say, this is syntactically correct, it does what you said it would do, but it will make our life difficult in the future. Here's why. And here's where you start contributing more value than just works or doesn't work. Branching plan, very boring details. We have a Tizen branch. Yunsu explained most of this before, so I won't go into details. We have a Tizen branch, which is unfrozen, and we have frozen branches. I think that if you see the drawing, it gets a little easier. We have an unfrozen line that receives bug fixes and features. At one point, this thing here is feature freeze. We branch it off, right? We have a frozen branch. Now it only accepts bug fixes. It doesn't accept new features. And that's where releases come from. Right? We branch it off, and if necessary, just make a little fixes to get a release done, and it goes out to the public. Okay, I had to shorten so that you guys won't go hungry for lunch. Do we have any questions?
Before you get to questions, definitely, if you're interested and you're going to be in Korea, sorry, I have to preface this. Tizen Developer Summit is in Korea, November 11th and 12th, and it's actually at the front end of Korea Linux Forum. So if you're already attending Korea Linux Forum, we'd love for you to come to Tizen Developer Summit as well. Now, questions?
Yes.
So whose responsibility is it to write packaging changelog? Developers or maintainers?
The package changelog, you mean
Packaging,
like the
yeah.
ones that show up on RPM changelog? Isn't that the commit that you make in Git show up as changelog?
No, it's a separate thing.
I thought
Commit
that,
message is one thing.
no, I thought that was automated.
RPM changelog is the other thing.
It isn't?
Yes, these are two independent things. Of course, the commit message comes from the submitter. So if I express the opinion, I believe it must be maintainer because
Okay, so we have an opinion that should be the maintainer. I can say probably that the person who's making the change, if this person knows that the change is significant and should be in the change log, they should include it. And the reviewers might say this change is actually significant, it should be in the change log, and therefore please include the change log in your change, right? So a -1 might be, thank you, the contribution is really, really good. It's actually too big and it needs to go into the change log. So please update your change and do it. And now it's the maintainer responsibility. If the contribution goes through and you didn't catch it, the maintainer needs to add it. This is my opinion. Of course, we can put it to discussion.
So you might want to put that on the mailing list.
We can put it on the mailing list and discuss it.
Isn't the RPM change log created when you do GBS submit?
And that's what I thought it was automatic.
well,
but they're saying
the
that
date is added automatically, but the sensible message which can be comprehended by people, humans, it comes from the human.
So yes, but GBS submit takes a
That's another
from
thing.
the
That's a
maintainer.
message which comes to the submit tag. That's the third thing. It definitely is done by maintainer. Only maintainer can submit it. Obvious.
Yeah, so my experience is that most of the time the commits contain too much information.
Right. That's the
And
point.
The change log is really like fix this important bug, made this important change that is visible to you.
And it should be readable by like not too technical people even. So
I
it's
agree.
like user visible. And my point is only the maintainer in general has skills to do this.
So you're saying the maintainer is probably the most skilled person. That
Yes.
probably is true.
Who can translate this commit message unreadable to a user-friendly message.
However, given the other responsibilities the maintainer already has, given all of the work the maintainer has to do, all the maintainer might have to do is say, thank you, please write this in the change log and resubmit. And that will be fine.
Or that's a potential job for the integrator.
Or it could be the integrator.
If
somebody
I was a
else.
developer, I would answer the maintainer, okay, you are a bureaucrat, here's your message. You could do it yourself.
We can discuss a little more on how to do this.
Your patches won't be applied.
Well, if you want to attract developers,
I have a more fundamental question, I think. Not
Let's hear
quite
it.
as detailed. So you mentioned everything needs to, all the submissions need to lead towards the stated goals
Yes.
as interpreted by the architects and the technical steering group.
Yes.
Are these goals already set, so to speak? I'm of course mostly interested in the future development of the IVI profile.
So you're asking what the stated goals, like long-term, short-term, medium-term goals are. So the idea that the project is, the companies, the big decision makers are actually trying to ship a device with this and putting millions of dollars into the project, get a say into long-term where this thing is going, goals, vision, strategy, if you want to call it like that. The technical people take those, interpret into medium and short and long-term decisions. Maintainers take those and interpret into short-term goals. This is what we need to do in the next couple of months. So your question is really, has anybody set the big ones already out?
Specifically for the IVI profile, which interests me the most, of course.
And specifically for the IVI, I'm going to answer that I don't know of any website or any Jira task where this is stated explicitly. These goals probably exist in implicit mode, like I expect that our IVI people can say, yes, of course we know what to do, but they never wrote it down. So I can take a task to talk to them and make sure that these long-term goals get written down. It might be like, we want to make the best IVI for Wayland, I don't know. But somebody needs to write them down.
A suggestion simply is if you want to do something, before you start, just say, I would like to do this. Is this in line with what other people think? And everyone will say, then, if it's a short-term goal, the TSG and high-level architects don't care, but maintainers will, and they'll respond. If it's a medium-level goal, architects will respond, or they'll say, look, it's a long-term thing. This does align or it does not. And then you know not to waste your time or to do something.
Yeah.
If it's more that you're wondering about other people's timelines, if they will produce something when you need it or want it, that's going to be much less reliable.
That's something different.
Yeah, that's going to be
That's something different.
That's
Yeah.
a big, much
That's
different
not
problem.
what I'm asking.
Yeah. But I still think that long-term, the goals, vision of the project, these need to be written down.
Yep.
Other questions before we
We
close
have
for
a couple
lunch?
of minutes here.
Got one. I was wondering if we could set up a mentoring program, because the workflow is not very easy to understand for beginners. And coming from the Debian project, there is such facility to bring more developers to the project.
So looking at setting up a mentoring program for that's sort of implied in the community rules we talked about, helping other developers, but there isn't. I don't think there's anything official or specific.
We
that
don't
we're
have
talking
an
about.
official mentoring program, and to be quite honest with you, I don't see it happening in the short term, because we have quite a few goals in terms of 3.0 right now. The people participating are right now
Shipping a device.
shipping a device and actually getting it to build, right? Yeah. So in the short term, I don't see this happening, but it's something that we can keep in the back of our minds in terms of interest from the audience, like who wants to participate. If the people participating are sitting next to other people in their own offices, we don't need to provide a mentor. If they're coming from other places on Earth, or they don't have access to
I was
quick
thinking
access, then we might have to do that.
more for the open community, because
I
from
want
inside
the open
it's
community. Just now, I don't want to dedicate resources for people who don't come. Right? So let's do it the other way around. Let's be reactive. If people are actually looking for this, by all means, let us know where the pain points are. We might start creating wikis. By the way, there's a wiki. Right? The source at tizen.org is not a wiki, but there's a wiki elsewhere where we document and people are allowed to post things and best known methods. And if we need a few mentors at one point, we might create them. Just right now, we don't have the resources and we don't know if there's the need.
okay.
Yeah, you said right at the beginning that there'll still be some old style development in terms of products for specific profiles. Could you elaborate on what you see the purpose of them being within an open community?
I can probably tell you what I see happening there is mostly confidential features by one specific or two specific hardware makers. I'm not talking about that. I'm thinking one or two hardware makers, we want to ship this device, and I don't want to tip my hand to the competition. So in the private, they develop it, right? And once it's done, they publicize it and make it public. The thing is to understand is the moment that they make it public, they have to go through the review process. So they're not bypassing the process, they're just doing the development close before. This is not used in the open source world. Right? So if I take the hint from my Intel developer manual, when our kernel developers, and you're going to see them all here at the kernel summit, they're working on hardware which is confidential. Right? They don't publish the names, they don't publish code names, they don't publish PCI IDs. They're doing all of this development in the closed. So it's ready. Right? They're following the hardware, they're making it ready, they're making it sure it works. Now, the confidentiality was lifted, the hardware was announced. Now we also ship all the code.
Okay,
This
but
is what
that
we
has to go
did
back through the review process.
But then it goes through the review process. Right? You don't bypass the process, you just do the development in the closed. This happens quite often, for example, for video drivers. Right? The IP industry the IP in that industry has very complicated legal concerns these days. So many of those are closed. So we're gonna have a little problem there.
But this should be the exception rather than the rule.
Exactly.
I mean,
So I was
Should be
going
the
to say,
same.
is that something you're encouraging other companies involved
No, it's
in?
definitely not encouraging that, especially because all of that is outside the product. I can't control what even my partners are doing behind closed doors, right? They do whatever they want. Now they become public and they tell me, here's 100,000 lines of code of this new feature that we just finished for this hardware we're also announcing right now. That puts a burden on us because now we have to review 100,000 lines of code, right? So that will take time, and they have their deadlines. We have our own deadlines. We have our own stuff to do. So we definitely do not encourage that. We want to be
And will
open.
the reviewers then commit to providing the same service to other companies as they're going to provide to Intel and Samsung when they do that kind of development? Is the review process going to be fair in that if I do a load of closed shop development on my specific hardware, which, as you say, is understandable, it's competitive advantage, is the review process going to dedicate as much time to other companies who do use that tactic as it is to Intel and Samsung in that situation?
I would
Is
hope
there
so. I mean,
other-
to be honest, it's kind of theoretical because we haven't gotten to that point
Okay,
yet.
okay,
But
but have you
yeah,
got
I
anything
mean,
in
the
place
goal
to
is that for
ensure
that to be
that?
the case, right? The goal is, we talked about earlier, right? The goal, even though Samsung and Intel are the primary drivers of the project, the goal is to bring other companies into the fold. And while Samsung and Intel will continue to have a large say in this based on our stake, you know, we're not going to say, okay, well, we're not going to dedicate resources to you because
If
you know,
we
you did
treat
something
you-
close.
I'm
If we
just
treated
thinking
you-
that the same practice has been seen already with the whole Symbian
Exactly. Thank you.
project,
That's exactly
and
the
it was-
example I was
and
going to
it was
give.
disastrous. in that
Exactly,
situation.
that's exactly what happened with Symbian. So if you have a company that relegates everybody else as second-class citizens and never reviews their changes and never makes it work for their profile, they're just going to walk away. It's not a win-win relationship, right? So if we want to, we want these companies to participate in Tizen. Therefore, we need to figure out some time. Now, if you have 100,000 lines of code coming in,
Give us a heads up.
it gives us a heads up. Yeah. But another thing is that the requirements are going to be a little different, right? If you're going to submit 100,000 lines of code, we want you to guarantee that you're going to stay along and maintain this thing. We're not going to accept code dumps, right? So you have to stay along. And if you're an unknown person, we're going to say, hey, 100,000 lines of code, we've never seen you before, we don't know what your commitment to the project is. I'm sorry, we're not going to accept this thing, right?
As is, we may go
As
back
is.
and
So
look at it later.
we might look at it later. If you continue for a couple of months and show that you're interested or your company's interested or whatever, then yes, let's take the risk.
Quick question.
One more
Yeah, one
question
more question,
before
go
we...
Very quick. The initial seating of the architects and steering group is only Samsung and Intel employees, or
So the initial sitting of the architects, yes, because that's the people who are right now working on Tizen, and these are the people who have the largest stake. We definitely want to enlarge it to include a few other companies as soon as it's feasible. So we need to identify people who have the commitment to the project,
yeah,
who have the
absolutely
expertise,
everything you
etc.
explained before.
But we do definitely want to enlarge it. And again, we want to make this about the expertise and not the company they work for. Okay, I'm holding you back, guys, for lunch. So thank you, everybody,
Thank
for
you,
coming.
everybody.
We're available for more questions if you want after lunch.